Hello, and welcome to TGCon Live. This is a roundtable on change management. And before we jump into our topic, I have just a couple of housekeeping items I wanted to mention. First, you're going to want to use theater mode. We think that's your best viewing experience. It gives you the opportunity to see our speaker, see the slides, and also engage in the chat. Don't forget that there are some polls set up, so I'll invite you to click on the tab next to chat, and there you can engage in the poll that we're going to be talking about in the middle of this presentation. Next, if you happen to have audio or video problems, you can click on the support tab on the main platform and then click on Get Help. That's a good place to go if you're having any audio or visual problems. You can also try refreshing or making sure that you're using the Chrome browser. Those are the top reasons that people have audio and visual problems. Next, I want to make sure that you take a look down below the presentation and look for the after session survey. If you click that, we would love to have your feedback about today's presentation. My name's Dana Johnson-Downing, and I'm the Director of Policy and Partnerships here at TraceGains, and I'll be your roundtable moderator today. I'm thrilled to be able to introduce our panelists. First, we have Elizabeth Salvo. She is the Director of Regulatory and Consulting Services at Esha Research. They're the makers of Genesis R&D software, and we're proud to be one of their partners. We also have Ruben Galbraith. He's a sales engineer here at TraceGains, and John Thorpe is our product manager. We're just gonna, before we jump into our topic, I'm just gonna give you kind of an overview of some of the things that we're going to talk about when the panel starts. We're gonna kind of define what it is that we mean by change management. You know, organizations have to change to modernize, improve performance, and seize new opportunities in the marketplace, like react to consumer preferences. Sometimes those changes are externally driven, whether they're from our supplier, shifting regulatory requirements, reacting to new specifications, new sources of raw materials, those kinds of things. But then sometimes we have internally driven changes that we are reacting to, and that comes often in the new product reformulation, new suppliers, new processes, new internal processes. The other thing that we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about some helpful tools. You have two software companies here, both Esha Research and TraceGains, that have tools that you can use to identify changes and help to make sure that those changes are implemented correctly and compliantly. And the good news is our software actually works together. I'm pleased to turn the floor over to Elizabeth Salvo, who's going to start us off. Elizabeth, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Dana. My name, again, Elizabeth Salvo. I'm Director of Regulatory and Consulting at Esha, and I've been in the industry for over 20 years. And our primary focus at Esha is training and helping our customers utilize Genesis in the most efficient and effective way. But in addition, we also help customers build their portfolio of ingredients and recipes on a daily basis. So we actually use our software every day. And that keeps my team in particular very immersed in the regulations, guidance, and industry trends. And that runs a parallel path with our development and regulatory teams. Prior to Esha, I was a customer of Esha's and utilized Genesis with one of the largest global restaurant companies, where we managed a massive portfolio with a very complex global supply chain.
Great, thanks, Elizabeth. I'd like for you to give us some examples of ways that changes surface in, you know, I know you do all these consulting engagements with your customers. You basically have lived change management as a career, so I know you know this better than anyone. Talk through how changes surface in most organizations.
So I think the most important thing about all these different changes is where they're coming from, right? But if you have a protocol and that could address each type of these changes and how your company can adhere to those changes, that's the best, the best policy in my book. That way everyone's on the same page, where everyone understands when this type of change happens. So you can imagine if a big regulation change happens, that's a significant different path than if you just have one small supplier spec update. Maybe you get notification from one of your suppliers that they're introducing a new allergen or a new ingredient. Obviously, that would take a much more urgent review. And then, of course, there's types of change initiatives where you're actually initiating the change from your company, where maybe you're introducing a new product, or you're reformulating, or a new package design, any of those. And every one of these scenarios will probably have a different line of defense and almost a different path, if you will, to ensure that you've covered all your bases and to ensure that all of the data gets where it needs to go in the proper format. I would say the biggest piece of information that I could possibly give you is communication is always the best part of any plan that you might have or standard operating procedure, because if those changes in that communication system is crucial to eliminating those constant state of fire drills, right? Regulatory changes, luckily for all of you, are maintained inside of Genesis software, but you also need to keep a pulse on those hot topics and recalls and industry trends that are very imperative to staying ahead of the curve for when these big changes hit your desk.
Great. One of the common questions that you said comes along, Liz, are what are some situations when people want to know why should they update their label?
Well, as I said before, I think the rules state that a company has the responsibility for the accuracy and the compliance of the information presented on their label. That being said, there are different, I would say, levels of changes. So if you're introducing a new ingredient or a new allergen, that would certainly take precedence where you'd need to update immediately to ensure that you had a compliant label and everything was declared properly. Perhaps you're on a new, clean label campaign or something like that, where you need to look at all of your, where your sources of ingredients are coming from. So those are all very important changes as well. But then you'd also, there might be a situation where it's a minute or a small change, and that might be where you have to start modeling to see how it might affect your finished label and how urgent that request is for you to update.
The next common question that Liz said that she gets is, when do you have to update an ingredient if a supplier sends me a new spec?
So again, you're going to have to take a look at that spec, right, and see what kind of changes are on that spec. If it's an ingredient statement or allergen, that's going to have to be done immediately, and that would take precedence. But again, I think that if you have your ingredient protocol in place for supplier updates, so that everyone's on the same page, where you have the necessary documentation, you can substantiate your nutrition facts panels, your ingredient statements and allergens. That's having all of your ducks in a row, if you will. And then having that written protocol so all of your team members are aware of what type of changes and what departments have to be notified and when. I think for larger companies with larger portfolios and multiple suppliers, and especially if you have, for each ingredient, you have multiple suppliers, that could be a very big daunting task. Just getting all of your suppliers for one ingredient to update at the same time could be a feat in itself, right? So I think companies approach updates in different ways, and I've seen many different versions. But one approach is you could have a policy in place with your suppliers for expiration dates of your ingredient specs. Maybe a 2-year retention policy, and always be in constant updating if you see any of your specs are getting older or getting close to that 2-year mark, to ask for updated information. So that's one way to start tagging for those. But another approach I've seen companies use is to update by category, and it's a great approach for feasibility and economical. And that makes a lot of sense. But and it does work well if you only have a couple suppliers. But that is a little bit more difficult if you have multiple suppliers for each ingredient. So that would be probably not the easiest way to approach it. But I would say the most popular method I've seen is the three-pronged approach. And how I explain that is, first, you're in constant update when you get ingredient updates from suppliers. So you're updating those ingredient specs as you receive those information and as it becomes available. Second, when a new or changed item is being planned, so in other words, maybe you're doing this internally, that's where you can take that great opportunity to check all of your ingredient suppliers, check your bills, check your rack, any claims for that item, to ensure that everything is compliant and that your label is accurate. It's a really good time to do a deep dive check on that, since you're updating your product anyway with, for whatever reason. But lastly, then you'd always have a list of those specs that require updated information, maybe by the date of their last spec. And to have those three prongs going continuously seems to be the most effective method that I've seen.
And speaking of updates, we do have a poll question that I want to draw your attention to. If you click over to the next tab over from chat, you'll see polls. And this is the poll question that we've entered in there. We'll have to give the audience a little bit of time to go in and answer that question, and maybe we can circle back and kind of see what's most common with our audience. We do have a grouping here of 6 common questions that Liz gets from customers and consulting clients. We're on our 3rd question now. I know that the audience is going to have questions as well, so don't forget to enter your questions or thoughts in the chat box after you finish the poll. The next common question is, what if the change is something coming from within my company? What do you do, Liz?
So I think, again, you're going to rely on that statement of work, right? Your statement of protocol or procedures, or your documentation. But my biggest advice would be to start ahead of the game. As soon as you find out that there's a big revamp coming or a packaging change or something like that, having that protocol alerts the entire system at the proper time, and then you can build in that lead time you need. If packaging needs X amount of days, or if your design department needs X amount of days, you need to find out what that lead time is from each of the department that it's going to touch. And that's part of your protocol, right? But for instance, I remember not very long ago, we had a package design change for one of our products, and they really didn't think it was going to affect anyone else other than the packaging. But of course, changing that packaging design affected the amount of product that goes in that package, and of course did affect the nutrient facts panel. So that's definitely something that maybe another department might not be aware that it's actually touching your facts panel, but it could possibly do that. And then again, when you're initiating that change, it's really just a good time to go back and check that your reference amount customarily consumed is accurate, and make sure that if you're making any claims or any of those types of things, all of that information is compliant, and all the packaging sizes, all of those internal protocols should hit those buttons long before it's ready to go live.
Next question is, what if the change is initiated by my supplier, but they have incomplete information? I bet that's a pretty big headache.
Yes, this is a daily event. So that's another great opportunity that if you can ensure that your suppliers are providing you the necessary information, at the very least, at least the mandated nutrients, right? Ingredients and allergens. And a lot of companies actually detail these types of requirements in their supplier agreements, which I think is a wonderful idea. Because if you're still missing some of those mandatory required data, I have had some suppliers, we don't just have it yet, we simply don't. So again, you're going to have to rely on your protocol. So what is your level of comfort if, your supplier is missing vitamin D or potassium or something like that? What is your level of comfort while you're waiting for that information, if you have to go live with that information? So that's where, push back to the supplier first and foremost. You need at least those mandatory nutrients. I need the allergens, I need an ingredient statement, sulfites even, right? We have to declare, make sure that we're under those 10 parts per million. But my first course of action, of course, would be to push back to that supplier. But then again, utilize that protocol document at your company and say, okay, if they're just not going to get it for us in time, what do we do? And that's when you can maybe utilize some of the USDA ingredients and see if that's a very comparable ingredient to the one you're using, and maybe source some missing information from that USDA file. I would certainly PDF that information as a spec document and attach that in my documentation, stating that the supplier was missing this mandatory nutrient, and I utilized this particular USDA file until I had updated information.
What if my ingredient supplier only provides nutrition on a much smaller basis, not the 100-gram unrounded?
So that is also a very common issue. And again, that's one of the things that I would suggest you sort of build into your supplier agreements as well, because giving you a 2-gram spec, unfortunately, it looks a lot different than if the nutrients were based on 100 grams. And cinnamon's a really good example for that. You know, most suppliers will give cinnamon on a 2-gram basis, and almost all the nutrients will round to 0. If for instance you had it on a 100-gram basis, then you'll see how different that nutrient facts panel will look. And my answer to that is yes. You know, although it's not written in the rules somewhere, what is written in the rules is that if I would like to make a claim on my finished product, or if I need to check the standard of identity for a certain ingredient that I'm listing on my product, I need to abide by the rules. And those rules are all based on a 100-gram basis. So it's really sort of tying your hands when you're getting these specs in these smaller amounts. And so I would always push back to that supplier and ask for 100-gram to see if, you know, that I try and get a policy going where your ingredients are all consistent on 100-gram. Another benefit to having your ingredients in that fashion instead of smaller amounts is if you were missing that nutrient for whatever reason, a mandatory nutrient, you could go to that USDA file, and most of those are on 100-gram, and it would be an apples for apples kind of thing, instead of trying to do all that mathematical calculation, which you might be wrong.
Thanks, Liz. I think this is an example of where standardization within the industry could really benefit a lot of us. And I know Ruben's going to talk about that in a few moments. Next question is, what if one of my suppliers is not required to list all of the sub-ingredients due to incidental additives, spices, or flavoring exemptions and refuses to disclose that information? What do you do, Liz?
So again, that would be something that I would want to include in my supplier agreements up front, long before I started purchasing from that supplier. And I understand that their hesitancy, they don't want to give away their formula and that, but maybe a non-disclosure agreement, et cetera. But if I need to, again, add up some other sub-ingredients, right? Incidental additives, right? I don't have to list, but perhaps, when you start working on all these other projects like clean label initiatives and combining some sub-ingredients from other ingredients, you can get a very convoluted and long ingredient statement without that information. So perhaps you can ensure then that, maybe you are going to exclude that from your label and it's an incidental additive, or yes, it's called flavoring and I don't have to disclose it on my label, but I need to know what's in it. So I can manipulate my ingredient facts panel and my ingredient statement properly. So again, it's a communication, it's a relationship with your suppliers, and an NDA that you're not going to disclose that to anyone else, but that's the reason you need that information.
Thanks, Liz. I'm going to turn over control to my colleague, Ruben, who is going to get to one of the burning questions that's appeared in the chat box, and that is, what does trace gains have to do with change management? Ruben, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dana. Let me see if I can wrest control of the PowerPoint over here. Let's see. There we go. Oh, maybe not. Let's go full screen again. All right, now we're moving forward. Yeah, so hey everyone, Ruben here from Trace Gains. The most important thing on this slide is to note that I somehow magically wore the same shirt as in my headshot. That should be impressive. There was barely a 1 in 8 chance of that happening when I went to my closet this morning. But I'm sure a lot of you guys saw the roll call for this one here, have talked to me before. I'm one of our sales engineers. I give a whole lot of our product demos. So if you've ever toured a product, maybe bought it, maybe considering it still, it was quite likely myself or one of my colleagues on there. I'm also joined by John Thorpe as well. So I'll give him a second to introduce himself, and then we'll get a little bit back into my part.
Hey everybody, John Thorpe. I am a product manager at TraceGains. I joined the company in November of 2019. My background, I'm actually a lawyer by training. I got into software development in the pharmaceutical and medical device industry for global compliance software. So very excited to be here. I think a lot of my role is perhaps talking about change management in the context maybe of product development and how we're looking to take some of those principles over to change management in the food and beverage and dietary supplement industry, and incorporate some of the principles that we've learned within the product itself, just like the question alluded to.
Perfect. Thank you, John. So with that, let's get over to, I hate to call it the commercial part of the webinar, but let's talk a little bit about how TraceGains helps with change management. And a lot of things I'm going to run through here really speak to the very specific situations that Elizabeth was covering earlier. Like, how do you handle this? How do you match it up with your internal processes? A lot of the internal processes that are going to be within your company are truly your own. So how does TraceGains really come into the fold with this? So I'm gonna do a little like 3-part presentation. The first one's gonna be around what overarching features, what technologies do we offer that help you along with change management? And just to give a little preview, it's how do you even recognize that a change is actually needed? And if so, how do you tell the right person? How do you tell the next person? How do you look at this minute little needle in a haystack piece of information and realize that it changed and it's going to be affecting your products? Then I'm going to get into some of our actual modules. I'm going to discuss them from 2 different angles, 2 different module stacks, as I like to call them. One of them is our supply chain stack. So we're going to look at what happens when the change is coming from really outside your organization, whether that's your supplier, the supplier locations you're buying from, the ingredients you're getting. Which of our modules handle that? And then I'm going to look a little bit more at our production type modules, ones that really speak to what's happening within your own facilities, whether it's a warehouse that you're auditing to see if there's any pest issues all of a sudden that need to be remedied, or something actually happening on your production lines. You know, the weight that you're filling up a certain bag to is trending upwards. How do you catch that very early and make this be more of an automated process? And last, before I leave this slide, I'm sure everyone's tired of all the Colorado shots in the background. So beautiful Mount Hood to the east of Portland, Oregon, where I live. So a little bit difference there on that one. Okay, so first of my 3 main areas I wanted to discuss with this. So the overarching concepts. The big one I wanted to drive home, got a little bit of an extra font size on it, was that half, at least, of change management is knowing that change is actually needed. So many of the situations that we were bringing up and that I've already seen in chat, like an allergen's changing on one of the ingredients I'm bringing in. What if you never get alerted to that? Or what if you're spending way too much time having people comb through documents, run checks, and so forth? So how does TraceGains help? At the broadest level, I always use this little rhyme. We standardize, digitize, and centralize these essential data points. So what does that mean? Let me break it down a little bit. I'm going to keep going with that allergen example here. So we have a standardized allergen form that we make all of the ingredient or even finished goods suppliers in our network fill out the exact same way. So instead of having a new allergen hopefully arrive on your doorstep, having to open up, remember how company X writes out their allergens, find the data point that matters on page 6, compare it against the version you previously had, you get the idea of what type of headache this is. Since we standardized this document, everyone's filling out the same allergen form. Since they're filling out the same form, it's not just another PDF to get filed away and reviewed. Each of the little answers in there is actually a digital data point. These digital data points are centralized in our cloud platform. So all of a sudden, you could pluck out that tiny piece of data within the allergen form that's on page 3, saying that they're using an artificial color to make their, I say turmeric since I see it over there on the right, look extra bright. That's something that you might not notice if it was coming in via their unique style of form. For us though, we catch that difference. We flag it for you right at the doorstep as it's coming in, give you the chance to maybe reject the document and downgrade your ingredients, say we're no longer approved to buy this, or maybe even kick off a whole set of workflows and notifications. That kind of brings me down to the next bullet point here. So it's wonderful to be able to catch those tiny little data changes over time. And I'll get into how that happens for a few modules, not just documents arriving. But what happens next is someone has to remember to do something. And as wonderful as the best written out procedures can be, there's usually still manual steps that we hear about. Someone has to remember to go tell someone about it. They have to write up a little email. They hope that that email gets responded to in a week and the next person takes their action. Again, TraceGains tries to automate that piece. The simplest part is having an automatic email get blasted out to an individual or a team or a certain member of a team that needs to know when allergens are changing, so they know that this minute little thing is underneath their nose all of a sudden. So when all that kind of happens, a lot of these changes have to do with your supply chain, maybe slipping up on you, maybe needing to get built out to be more robust. One of the biggest things, one of the biggest differentiators in TraceGains is the fact that we have this huge network. Just about every one of our modules is connected to this network. And it is a huge thing that's a massive resource. So let's keep running with that example. This ingredient you're bringing in, turmeric, all of a sudden has an artificial color going into it. You don't want to disclose that on the label for the 25 products of yours that use turmeric. What are you going to do? You can't go to the next trade show of ingredients. We can't even go to those anymore. You don't want to go to Google and start looking for a good purveyor of turmeric. We're going to offer you a button right there on the spot that says, let's search Market Hub. See out of the, 270,000 ingredients we have in there, which turmerics can I find? Can I filter them down to see the ones that don't have any artificial colors, maybe that are located within a certain distance of my manufacturing facility? We speed you along very quickly to find a replacement. All right, let's move forward a slide here. I only got 2 more on my little list, but I want to give just a brief little synopsis about how each of our modules covers change management. I'm not going to linger much longer on supplier management. That's one of our flagship modules. So many of the things I've been speaking of, the details on vendors and ingredients, that's where that all lives. The piece I did want to call out though is that's where we're connected to Esha and their Genesis product. So we have a little technology called Data Link, where if you're collecting up all of these ingredient details, let's say nutrition amounts, we could have that flow nicely into Genesis to help you build out a label. Another cumbersome process of, oh, something changed on this form. Now I need to copy it over. Why not let technology solve this? Also, by the way, I know one of the questions was, what if I'm not getting nutrition amounts at per 100 grams? Our standardized form makes suppliers list it in that format. That's our default way of collecting it. So there's one solution to your problem. If you're having trouble getting data from your suppliers the right way, force them onto a standard. So a lot of supplier management is about these documents that are sort of a snapshot in time. Did I get this certificate? Is it good for 2 years? Whatever. Supplier compliance, another module of ours, is more so about instant alerts on individual batches. So this is where you could see an alert that says this COA that's arriving, the moisture percentage on this turmeric is going to be off. We're going to catch that automatically as early as possible, alert you, alert your supplier. Audit management to keep us moving along. So let's say something's going wrong at one of your facilities. Do you want to learn this 3 months later when FDA shows up and says they found a rat that's in a trap and it's been decomposing, it's down to its bones? No, you want to have this information early. You could schedule audits, have people be walking through your own facilities, going through automated checklists, taking pictures, and you could have instant alerts. We call them business rules sometimes, that will tell the right person, wow, there's something wrong with this facility as of moments ago. You need to remedy it. Smart Alerts, one of our newest modules. We have a whole spotlight on it tomorrow you should check in on. It's about kind of signing up to these global ingredient issue tracking systems that we have set up. So we are pulling in all these different databases. Has there been a FDA alert, RASFF import issue around a certain ingredient? We can tell you about that instantly rather than you finding it weeks or months down the road. And last but not least, in our supply chain stack, our specification management module is all around collaborating live with those suppliers that have their free accounts in our network to really pin down the details on ingredients. So again, this is that situation where you don't want to go to a dead end working with a supplier, thinking they're going to be great, their ingredients start showing up and they're not. You want to be able to go back to that collaboration where you went down step by step and said, this is exactly what we plan on buying from you, how we want it delivered, how we want it to be parsed out into different packages, all that jazz. All right, I want to get to our question and answer here, so my final slide. But this is our other kind of stack of modules here. So this is around production quality. I'm not sure what you're making at your facilities. We support people making all sorts of products, and I'll let you try to guess what that blurry thing is on the right. I think they're pretzels or sesame sticks. But our quality management module is about tracking all those critical control points that are happening at your facilities. Again, you don't want to know that a change is needed in a certain production run 2 weeks later when the final QA check on it realizes that the pretzels are the wrong shape. They're not those beautiful little cycles, you know? Instead, we could have a critical control point where you have someone checking every single batch that's rolling down the line. Is this up to code or not? And if it isn't, can we instantly stop this, run a rework procedure, all that jazz? They're filling in, yet again, our standardized digital forms, which means that that data can be compared against business rules and spark change immediately. I brought audit management onto this slide as well because you can audit your own facilities, not just your own suppliers, so it works into that stack. And our newest module, which is just coming out now, is formula management. This speaks to a lot of the things Elizabeth was talking about earlier, where you need to figure out, like, what's the whole scope of this change? Okay, are turmerics changing a little bit? Does that matter much at all? Oh, wow, it's going into 25 of my different products, 15 of which are making claims about it not having any natural added colors. This is a module that helps you drill down and look at this holistic view of what you're finally producing. So you can decide, geez, what's the ramifications of this? Do I need to change products? Sometimes it's more than just saying, I need a new turmeric provider. You need to change your products right there on the spot. All right, so that was me rambling for my normal long period of time. So let's get us moving forward here a little bit to our kind of question answer type prompts. And I'll let Dana lead us through these. And I know John and I are gonna be chiming in.
Great. Thanks, Ruben. So we've already talked about change management as it pertains to labels and formulation. Ruben talked about how trace gains can help with that. For the next few slides, we're going to kind of lift the veil a little bit, so to speak. And we're going to talk to John about how it is that we architect our software to address change management issues. So John, you work a lot with standard product management principles and how you and the software development team manage through the development lifecycle. Can you talk to us a little bit about how that applies to maybe the food industry and other disciplines?
Yeah, absolutely. In many ways, and I was happy to jump on, particularly this roundtable, because in many ways, the discipline of product management really is change management. We have to constantly prioritize limited resources to deliver, whether it's strategic growth initiatives or whether it's customer enhancement requests. We meet, nearly every day, multiple times a week with customers to understand where we need to go and how we need to get there, including, for example, creating a better architecture for you to manage change management, whether that's surfacing the right insights at the right time, whether that's improving collaboration, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. With software development going behind the veil, if you've never sort of looked at how that works from a product or engineering perspective, typically we work in what are called sprints, which are sort of small defined periods of time, 2 to 3 weeks, for example, where a defined set of work gets done. Those sprints live within a larger product roadmap. Product roadmaps, for example, are, if you think about the presentation Gary had today, we're releasing formula management on X date. So they could go over a year, and it's sort of these high thematics of how to get there. As you can imagine, both roadmaps and sprints are constantly barraged with change. That's, clients demanding improvements to existing features, That's market shifts. So we need to change where we're going in some way. It could be bugs in the system, regulatory changes to the regulatory regime. So there are a lot of ways that change impacts how product managers do their work, and that's no different here than at TraceGains. One of the things we do, and again, talking to collaboration and really transparency, is we have a prioritized backlog of features. So that includes for all of our products and kind of mashing those together into one large backlog. That backlog helps us to, when, for example, development, so engineering, whether it accelerates or whether it deaccelerates, if features are removed from a sprint or we need to add new features to a sprint. When that happens, we have a single sort of transparent place where people can go across the company to see how we're making prioritization decisions and also comment on that. So I think in the same way here at TraceGains, a lot of what we're doing within the software and where we're hoping to go, you'll see a lot of investment in this over the next year, is to really support those two key thematics. Both transparency, where it's appropriate and applicable, of course, and at the same time, user collaboration. So I think Ruben was talking about sort of surfacing through workflow and business rules, insights related to changes, let's say, to ingredients, maybe caught through online forms from your suppliers. That type of insight is critical, and we want to continue to improve how TraceGains handles and manages putting together a sort of holistic record of things associated with your item, for example. So you'll see improvements coming out in the next couple months related to more insight around your item, what suppliers are with it, what items supplied are associated with it, what specifications, formulas, recipes, etc. And what we're hoping to do there, again, is to have a single transparent place where you can make change management decisions in collaboration with your departmental partners in a way where the relevant information is there. And that's something that we're going to continue to tweak as we hear back from you. But that's an example of sort of how we're taking some of the product management principles of transparency and collaboration and looking to apply them as we move forward and build out TraceGains platform.
Thanks, John. So why is it important for our users and customers to understand change management architecture?
Yeah, so what I found, at least in my past, is that individual instances of change can sometimes be hard to predict. However, it's pretty easy to sort of look for patterns, right? And what those patterns can do is help to identify, where change most frequently happens in your business. So you can kind of focus energy and effort in making that area more efficient. So where there's a lot of change, make that area more efficient, and then free up more resources for instances where unexpected change occurs. And when I think about a change management architecture, sort of what does that mean? And it's sort of something, it's kind of a jumble of words we put together, but really it's a set of principles, processes, or workflows that can live on a well-governed software system, or even an aggregation of software systems. And Ruben alluded to that. And it's really critical with respect to why, it's worth spending time investing in configuration. It's worth spending time learning through the academy, for example, about workflow or business rules. Because if you have a well-governed system where the same data point means the same thing through the platform, and when you apply things like business rules and collaborators are working there, the route that information takes to get to the right people can become quicker. People don't have to do more data input. So the architecture, again, those different points that I just mentioned, for example, in new supplier onboarding or document management, investing time there to set that up. We talked about risk review and alert, like Ruben alluded to, through smart alerts, specification management. All those areas have points, for example, in specification management, sharing your specifications and going through maybe communication with the supplier if there's disagreement or something like that. There's points where there's interaction, and some of those interactions cause change. So learning about how to manage that change, but hopefully what we're trying to do in TraceGains is for when that point happens, is give you the right information to make that decision quicker. Because I think as we've learned, change management ultimately comes down to sort of human insight and human change. And what we want to do is provide that human behind the decision the right information.
Okay, why might a change management audit be valuable, and what do you mean by that? What is an audit?
So I seeded this question because I was a former auditor, but we don't provide that service. So I'm not nothing untoward there. So really, to better understand where you should apply your effort, as I referred to in the last question, with respect to building out that architecture and investing time in configuration or workflow or business rules, you need to know, again, where change is most often happening, where you probably have a good idea where that is, but also where you might not have a good idea where that change is happening. And the thing to look for really is where you see change happening in the context of lots of highly manual work or lots of single person bottlenecks. And, you know, one of the key things there that I alluded to in the last question was that really focusing, once you do the audit and identify where and who, is focus on the who, because I think research shows again and again that in the context of change management, really it's the person who actually has to do the change that is critical to the success of the larger change management process. And that's why 1 in 3 projects actually typically fail with respect to change management, because not enough focus is on the individual. So again, use the audit to identify the right stakeholders, and then maybe talk with your CS team member or, you know, one of us or internally about, you know, how can TraceGains and the architecture we've set up, you know, highly configurable business rules, workflows, sort of plug into that person to help them have the information they need to make that change faster. And as Ruben said, you know, we are investing a lot of effort to automate a lot of that. So look for more there as well.
Great, thanks, John. One thing we want to talk about is what are some good ways to ensure that you're communicating well with your upstream and downstream supply chain partners about changes? Ruben, do you want to start us off on that one?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And so often when we're talking about, you know, our systems, we almost oversimplify it. We're like, you know, there's an ingredient supplier and a maker of a food product. But as we all know, there's hardly ever such a simple relationship, you know, one-to-one, and that's the entire supply chain. So many of our products are kind of built in the mindset of maybe you're bringing an ingredient in and then maybe you're sending it out the door later on. So many of our things, including supplier management, has kind of like a sister product to it, in this case, customer management. So very often, and we're seeing this more and more commonly, especially over the last year, people are signing on for this suite of modules that helps both the collection and the disbursement of information. And yet again, it all comes back to those central principles. If you're sharing the same thing, you want to be passing along the exact same data in the same format, that's something that is painful to do manually. You know, a lot of times we only think about our company's pain problems, collecting it up. Maybe another department in your own company has trouble sending that information out. So we try to just streamline that so that things can kind of make their way along a supply chain between different people with the right information being added at each stage so that it's just doing it in a consistent way. A lot of it goes back to just the general idea John had a moment ago of, you know, there are going to always be exceptions, but if you have a plan for how to handle it, a place to store that certain bit of data, knowledge of who's going to be filling it in when, that's when things can start flowing pretty well. So that's my angle on it.
Do you want to talk a little bit about TraceGains standard forms and how they detect changes and can facilitate updates, Ruben?
Yeah, and we gave a couple examples of this earlier, like that turmeric, which all of a sudden has a new allergen that someone needs to be alerted to. That's one type of example. I kind of wanted to take a little different angle. Let's say one of your suppliers fills out our supplier questionnaire yet again, our amazing 6-page document, every question under the sun about their safety procedures, where they're registered, what things they follow. So that's great. We collect that up for you. But the real part is like, how do you even use that information? So the power use case I like to get into is that you can take that information and not just have it be exposed in TraceGains. Oh, here's a little red dot that says they've had a recall recently. But you could have that work its way into a calculation that says if someone had a recall recently and they're supplying me 15 different ingredients and they don't have their FDA registration number on file, all of a sudden they have this risk calculation which tallies up. That is all of a sudden a really more interesting bit of intel. Like none of those single data points always matter by themselves, but you get this holistic picture as you stack together our modules and collect up more and more info and just run these calculations that can lead to really more decisive moments of change. So I say get that information in, but more importantly, decide what of these things are going to trigger bigger events within your company.
Thanks. I do know that we're out of time, so I wanted to go back to our panelists and ask, Liz or the rest of the panelists if they had any final thoughts they wanted to share.
I do see one question pop in, which we can answer real quick if you want.
Sure,
There's
I'll
a
read it.
question about, oh yeah.
What is
Yeah, there's a
Tracy's
question.
strategy with delivery of online forms to out-of-network suppliers?
Yeah. So our biggest part of our strategy here is that suppliers, so if you're a food manufacturer, you're inviting your suppliers, they join our system for free. So we guide them on how to set up their free accounts. And it's almost a real simple interface where they go through and are presented with just the forms of information that you've requested. We try to make it as easy on them as possible. And even so, if they run into any issues, we literally have a team dedicated to bringing your suppliers on board. That's their full-time job. Our network succeeds when suppliers can use it easily, whether they're people who are very intimate with TraceGains already or brand new to it or international and needing our forms translated to a different language. We want to help them come on board. I mean, the whole ocean rises when, you know, everyone's kind of swimming the same direction on that. That's a mixed analogy.
Great. We are out of time, so I want to invite the audience to download this presentation. It's in one of your tabs next to the chat function. The very last slide has everyone's email address that's participating today. So you can go ahead and you can ask any follow-up questions you have of our panelists. And feel free to chat us any questions that come to mind. Thanks for participating.
Thank you, Dana.
So long, everybody.